Here are the best chronographs at every price point, grouped into under 5k, 5 to 10k, 10 to 20k, and the fourth group above 20k and money's no object. Quick context: I've deliberately chosen a mix of less well-known micro brands and more established classics, with 5 to 7 best picks in each of those four groups. I think it's interesting to see that comparison of what amazing watches you can get at relatively more affordable prices, but it's equally fun to see what a fantasy budget can buy. So let's kick off. Group 1, under 5k. At 7, Studio Underdog Watermelon. I featured this in my short video on watches for summer, and I love this colourful original design from a great micro brand. At 6, Seiko have been making chronographs since the 1960s, and my favourite is the Pogue, which along with the Speedmaster has also been up to space. I'm looking for a vintage one that coincides with my birth year. Of the current range, the Prospex chronograph is great value. At 5, Christopher Ward is another micro brand you have to admire as a pound for pound great for the quality they are bringing at the price. At 4, Hamilton American Classic Intramatic. Hamilton make great field watches, and this is a really cool choice. At 3, Tissot Telemeter 1938. I love the vintage vibes and aesthetic of this watch. At 2, Longines Big Eye, very characterful and original watch, and this is another one I've considered buying very closely. And lastly, at 1 in this group, the Tudor Black Bay Chrono, the more accessible and obtainable at retail Daytona Panda lookalike. Now on to group 2, between 5 and 10k. At 7, bit of context. The first luxury watch I bought 22 years ago was a Tag Heuer Carrera, and for me, their 2023 models are perhaps their best releases since. I love the layers and texture in the dial of their chronograph. At 1,000 more, I also continue to love the Tag Heuer Monaco. For me, it is one of the most iconic chronographs of all time, since it was introduced in 1969 and made famous by Steve McQueen. At 6, needing no introduction, another iconic chronograph, and arguably the one with the most impressive heritage as the first watch on the moon. And while watch prices are going up, it still remains relatively well priced. It wears great on the wrist, and there's also plenty of other options with Omega's heritage and dark side of the moon ranges. I personally actually prefer some of the older vintage Speedmaster models, where that aging patina on the dial gives it that extra burst of character. At 5, Breitling Premier Heritage Chronograph. This is one of my favourite Breitlings across all of their ranges, and it's a striking dial colour. At 4, the IWC Portuguesa Chronograph comes in a lovely burgundy and green dials, and this is another watch I've considered but to date never quite pulled the trigger on. At 3, Habring Doppel 38. Kudos here to Teddy Baldassar for his video which introduced me to Habring, and I love the salmon dial and distinct design. Offers something very different. At 2, Zenith Chronomaster. Now Zenith are the founding father of the El Primero movement that powered the original Daytonas. Zenith offer both a great Daytona alternate and a more interesting original vintage take with their Zenith Chronomaster. And lastly, within this price group at number 1, the Cartier Santos chronograph. That might seem an unusual pick, but this is my favorite Santos. It's a bit different, and it really does wear great on the wrist. Alrighty, last 2 groups. So now in the 10 to 20k category. At 6, Grand Seiko Tentograph. Introduced this year, this is Grand Seiko's take, bringing their stunning dial textures to a chronograph. At 5, Glashütte Original, their vintage 70s chronograph date. I'm a big fan of Glashütte, and this is another vintage inspired watch I've been seriously tempted by it. At 4, it's the Rolex Daytona, really needing no introduction, and I've done a full video across the Daytona range, as well as featuring the model that I own, and I was lucky enough to buy at retail. And I think honestly, if you can put aside the hype, the Daytona does remain a beautiful, timeless design. At 3, the JLC Polaris chronograph. I'm a fan of the underrated Polaris range. At 2, Piaget Polo chronograph. This is my indulgent pick as I own it, but for good reason. I love that panda dial. I love the finish. and I think it's relatively decent value at the price. It's a great alternative to an Aquanaut, and it is an underappreciated gem. And lastly within this bucket, at number 1, the Laureato Chronograph, another Royal Oak spin-off that's often overlooked, but with a great, more affordable and more obtainable option. And now, the final bucket, watches over 20k up to money's absolutely no object, so the biggest hitters. At 6, the Parmigiani Tonda PF Sport, beautiful watch, and another underappreciated gem. I particularly love it in rose gold, but it's a lot to pay. At 5, really needing no introduction either, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph, starting at 30,000 for the steel versions, but really need I say more. I featured a full video on the AP Royal Oak. Put aside the hype, it remains a stunning, iconic design. At 4, a Longines Datagraph. There's a good range here. The pink gold is my personal pick. At 3, Patek Philippe. This really is timeless, understated elegance. At 2, the Grunfeld 1941 Chronograph. This is a standout statement piece, full stop. And lastly, at number 1, F. Piaget Centigraph, caliber 1506. I love this bold, inventive, colourful design. But these are watches I can't personally afford. I hope many of you can. So if you watch this to the end, thank you. I do hope you enjoyed this. And again, I'd love to hear your comments. Do you agree with these choices? And what do you feel I've missed? I really appreciate if you can click like. Thank you for watching. Not enough time.